not running Apple OS. It's running Linux. My web server. I'm going to host my website. Cool. Hey, Carl.
Hey, yeah.
I got a server in my hand.
Oh, nice. What are you going to do with it?
The ITR data center.
Cool.
Use it to host my website.
Okay.
I don't have to host it on GitHub.
Sure. You going to put Nix on it or what?
It has CentOS on it at the moment.
Oh, okay, sure.
It's gonna run double duty of Minecraft server as well.
I've never played Minecraft before.
I've never either. I have a very spotty gaming history.
If I have to spare resources for it, might as well rent that one as well.
No, I run some Raspberry Pis on my home network that I use as part of the Tor network. They're just relays, but they're doing something. All right.
Don't you enjoy it when Windows corrupts 6 of your computers?
I enjoy it even better when I don't have a Windows machine to my name.
Yeah.
I know it has its fans and devotees, but I don't miss it. Okay. I am ready to rock and roll. That ain't right.
Probably reading a resolution on it.
No, I think I forgot to put on my. I rebuilt my laptop over the weekend, and I have a little switcher. It wants to do everything. Dang it, dang it, dang it. Hang on one sec. I rebuilt my laptop over the weekend, and you can all see now exactly how judicious of a choice. Ah, here we go. There's my display menu.
I was thinking, like, I really should go to class, and I haven't been there in a month because we haven't had 2 classes because I skipped 2. So, like, I should go. But I was like, I really don't know. I need to go to that, so.
That's still goofed up.
So you gotta choose the 4:3 aspect ratio. Because I think you were in the 16:9.
Yeah, but for all semester I've been running a 16:9 ratio, and now suddenly it's decided, nope, not going to do that. Nope. It's still, I think that actually part of it might be that it's picked up the wrong resolution and sticking with it on the projector, so let's try this one more time. Great, now I can't find my...
I thought this was plugged in, but apparently it was. What's that battery percentage do?
He says he can't, but. He does during a final. He walked around like a couple times.
Isn't that funny? Been coming in all semester, it's been working just fine, and now suddenly it's like, nope, can't.
Probably.
That's making it worse. Oh my. Let's see. It's closer, but it's still not right. Which is not good on a day that we're going to be dealing with
Oh no.
layout and stuff. Mm-mm-mm.
That's what I was worried about. Was that I was like,
Air display off. Under scan. That's looking a little bit better. Let's see.
But that's also skill to work. So print out all the homework assignments.
well, I mean, I guess it's just like, just like,
This gives me time to see if I can find the fix real quick. Come on.
That's closer, but it's still ain't quite right. Oh, this is obnoxious. And that's still goofy. So let's see. Can I align these two things? That's a little closer. Well, boo. Don't want to do that.
Wait,
Projector.
mirror Creston instead of. Are you sure you don't want to mirror Creston?
Well, that's the question, right? That wasn't working so hot.
Oh.
They're 1024 by 768.
I mean, I can do that. The problem is that I've had better luck with doing 16:9 because they actually, on the IIT video capture, they got their house in order with aspect ratios. But right now, this is not holding up very well. Yeah, whatever I'm changing here, it's like. All right, well, I'll have to come in earlier and try to fix this on Wednesday. We'll do what we can. All right. Okay, sorry about the huge, hideous delay. Oh, and of course now I have no network. Oh, because I don't have. No, okay, so like I was like, this will be fine, I'll test it. I was sick this weekend and I couldn't do anything, so I'm like, I'm gonna rebuild my computer, which was a really great idea, as you can see, right? Because I got nothing going on here. So, Oh, no, I can. I just haven't, right? Oh, Lord.
You're better off going to IT Secure. You gotta put your full IT emails and then your full password.
Right. You can do that now?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do that
It's a lot
then.
easier than using
This stuff is a lot harder on Apple's devices. Because you
Yeah.
have to compile the wireless driver.
Okay. Thank you. I'm still sick. So that means I've got like a third of a brain functionality right now. Yay, I'm on the network. Okay, one more time with feeling. Boom. So today, I want to finish up what we didn't get to with typesetting, which is talking about sizing type at different sizes, right? Right in that little demo that we had on last Wednesday. We had a sad little repeating size everywhere. So we'll look at that and we'll look at baseline grid adjustments. I'm going to try to move through that quickly so that we can get to our old school page layout styles, specifically with position and float. We'll look at building responsive fluid grids at media query breakpoints and how to determine breakpoints. And then Wednesday we'll get into the fancy pants new ways of laying out pages with Flexbox and the even better, bigger, badder cousin CSS grid, which is totally awesome. I've only been using it for like a couple months. Nothing in production yet because I'm still too afraid of it, but it's what's coming down the pipe, and now there is some degree of support in all modern browsers, so it's time. We'll also look at responsive images on Wednesday, although that might very well get pushed to next Wednesday. Next Monday, you have fall break. All right, so no class next Monday. Okay, so let's refresh our memories of what we were doing last time we were all in here together. So we were doing, God, that looks like shit. I need to stop dickering with it, right? But I can't help myself.
Mr. Stoling?
Yes.
There's a subreddit that uses just a custom CSS file, and they do some crazy stuff with it. So if you want, it's OOER.
Yeah.
It's very funny. It's appropriate. It is appropriate.
Is it?
Yes, it is appropriate. But it's,
Does it fix broken aspect ratios?
it is the worst things you can do with just a custom CSS.
That's awesome.
We should look at it just
Awful.
for educational purposes.
No, I want to get this fixed, and we've got other educational purposes today, but I encourage you to post the link on Basecamp. All right.
Oh, they made it worse. Oh my gosh. They've got rotating stuff now.
You should look at this.
I'll just post a link on that.
Oh, I hate this so much. I hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it.
It still works though.
Yeah,
It still works.
What's the point?
I don't know.
There. That's better. It's taking up more of the window.
Yes.
It still has not quite the right aspect ratio because those should be almost circles, but they're
Why did you
eggs.
rebuild your computer again?
What's that?
Why did you rebuild your computer again?
Because I was sick and I was bored. Okay, let's try this
Sick,
again.
That's the ultimate cure.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah, so it's basically instant designer aneurysm.
It's on Basecamp.
Okay. And now everything looks effed on my display here, which is great. Life is pain.
It's a work of art.
Pure pain. Okay, I hate all of this so much. We're no better off.
You literally have a what?
I know. It's completely backwards and bizarre. Yeah, because like the title bar is sitting in two places.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I hate this so much. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. Okay, I'm just going to go with it. You can check out the work in the repo later. So we've got this nicely set page of type. We're conforming to a regular repeating baseline grid. So the next thing we want to talk about is how we size type. Right? We talk about the typographer scale in here. Like you go to Word, go to System Preferences, right? Okay, so that's a traditional typographical scale based around 72 points, right? I think that's where I left off last week. So you can use that scale, or you can do something more interesting, which is to apply a modular scale to your type. The idea is that just as we want to have repeating, predictable grid lines to have an organized page where your eye is kind of trained to move in a particular rhythm down the page, we want to break that up with differently sized text, right? That makes the page more interesting. It helps to indicate visually stuff that's really important, like a heading. Okay? So the way that this site works is that it allows you to choose all kinds of different ratios, or you can even put in a custom one yourself. All of these are based on music, right? No, we've got a couple of majors in here. Who's the trumpet player? Somebody plays trumpet. I don't know. So we can do things like a perfect fifth, which is da, da, right? It's going to be singing in class today, Abigail, right? Da, da. We can do a major third, which is da, da, right? Okay. Why is that so funny? Have you never heard somebody sing before?
I have.
I never heard me sing before, especially with a head full of snot. Okay. So I might opt for something. I usually go in the sort of like perfect fourth areas, right? Ooh, perfect fourth. If you're designing a website for somebody's wedding, the bridal march in Western weddings, right? Here comes the bride. That's a perfect fourth, da, da, right? So we might choose something like this. And what's great is that we can set our different bases for this. And of course, if we open up good old Atom here, let's refresh our memories as to what scale we had set here. Okay, so we had gone with a base font size of 18, and we had a 22 pixel baseline grid. So this text we can say is set 18 over 22. All right. So in our modular scale, we could go with something like 18 pixels. Right? And we can see the sort of rhythmic way that this text increases at a standard rate of 1.333. Where else do you see the ratio of 1.333? It's actually been the bane of my existence since I walked in here. The projector wants to be a 4:3 ratio, right? You go to your grandparents' house, that huge television set that's actually a piece of furniture that sits on the floor, that's 4:3. What's your television? 16:9. What's your laptop?
Depends. How old is the laptop?
If it's a new laptop, it will be 16:10, which is why when you watch Netflix on your laptop, you get little letterboxed bands on top and bottom, although you can see some shows on Netflix that they've actually expected people to watch on laptops, so they've shot them at 16:10, so that when you look at them on your 16:9 television set, then you get little black bars, barely noticeable, right at the edges. All right? So 18 pixels, 1.33, right? So we start getting sizes from this. Here's our 18 pixel body copy. Oops. Then we go up to 23.994 for the next largest piece of text, 31.984, and it goes up from there. As we use more dramatic ratios, for example, as we get closer to an octave, right? If we do something like a major seventh. Whew. This would be used for a much more dramatic text setting, right? Because you bounce from size to size much more quickly. If you're doing something like, I don't know, some kind of come-on site where you're trying to get investors for your startup or something, you might do something with a little bit more energetic, dramatic size differences between your copy. If you're setting text for an online dictionary, you might go with something like a minor second, where there are almost imperceptible changes from level to level of how big your text is. All right, we're going to go with something kind of happy medium, and we'll stick with this perfect perfect fourth right here. So how do we want to use these sizes for our headings? Recall that in this HTML we've got a heading 1 sitting here. We've got a heading 2 sitting here. Further on down, we've got a heading 3 sitting there. And another heading 2 in a side element that I added for today. So what size heading do you set first? The biggest. Most people would agree with you. I, of course, am not most people, so I disagree with you. That would be a logical next one, yeah? Yeah, the smallest. And here's the thing. Especially if you've been subjected to the Stali method of web design where you've been staring at this boring, uniformly sized, uniformly weighted, right? There's no bold or italic here. Your tendency is the second you start applying some design to something like headings is to go ape shit and start saying it's going to be bold and italic and this big and purple and flashing and the microphone's on the floor again, right? That didn't take long, right? I would advise you to take a much more conservative, delicate approach to your heading. So when I set text conservatively, I'm going to start with the most minor heading that I have on the page, Gesundheit. Okay? And my inclination as a designer is to do only one thing to any given level of heading. Maybe not for all time, but just as a starting place. So the first thing I will probably do is I will just take my heading 3 at whatever size it is and just make it bold, right? Let's see how that looks. It's not going to be dramatic. It's not going to win us any design awards. But if we go to our screen CSS file, okay, there's my stack O headings. All right, so I'm going to drop here an H3. And I'm just going to say font weight bold. All right, so that when I find my heading 3 here, now it's bold. Okay? Is it dramatic and exciting? No. Okay, right? It is bold. Oh, God, this aspect ratio thing is going to literally be the death of me. I'm going to hang out after class and get this sorted out. Probably be late to my next class. Okay? So that's a very conservative way to handle our smallest text size. So, what are we going to do one size larger? I just told you what we're going to do. One heading larger. I want to try to divorce size from levels of heading. Okay? So this heading 2, right? That's going to be this guy here. We're going to make this one bigger. All right? How much bigger? Well, Maps, what are you doing here? You're not helping at all. But thanks for letting us know what country we're in. Okay? All right, so let me go back here. Let me look at my modular scale. So if I'm looking at this 4:3 ratio, the next largest size that I've got from my 18 is 23.994 pixels, right? Or I could be a little bit more adventurous and go up to 31.984 pixels. How do we choose? You look at it, right? Let's just enter the number. Let's start with the bigger one for our heading 2. Okay, and we'll do the pixel value here just to start so that we've got a strong sense that we're doing this thing correctly. Whoops, not H3 though. Knock it up. H2. Font size. Okay. And I'm going to reload my page if I can find it. Everything is going crazy. There we go. Yay, okay. It's bigger. But what's the problem? Let's make it. Let's say we decided that's not big enough. I would completely disagree, but let's say, well, let's try one bigger. The problem is it's just not big enough. Let's go with this 42.635 pixel monster over here. Okay. All right, we reload it. All right. Now that's avant, right? Nice colliding lines of type. So what's the problem here? One of the things I really want to emphasize from here on out, and this came to me in a fever dream while I was sick over this weekend, is that too often people learn to write CSS, but they don't learn to understand CSS. Okay? So when we see something weird, we don't want to be like, oh man, that's weird. Why is this happening?
Because the font size is bigger than the spacing between the lines.
Okay, the font size, if everybody didn't hear Cooper, has increased, but our baseline grid is still that same 22 pixel thing all the way down. So what CSS / your browser's rendering of is doing it is it's trying very hard to shove 41 point odd pixels of text inside of a 22 pixel line. What happens is that starts to spill over and become a big problem. So let's just, for the sake of argument, say that we're not completely offended by the size of this text. Okay? And let's put a different line height on our H2. How much line height should we put in there? What's our baseline height? 22. So what's a nice number that we can build off of that? Say it louder, Reshma. 44, right? That's double the line height and conveniently just ever so slightly bigger than our little 42 pixel dealie here. Okay, so if we jump this up to 44, go back and reload. Boom! Look at that. So perfect. Now it's tight, right? We have the dot on that I almost colliding with the descender on the P. We'll talk more about type anatomy next semester in 362. Okay? But this fits. And this looks suspicious below here, though. Do we ever get back on? Why are we at that? Something is not correct. Ooh, what's not correct? Padding bottom is second handles, including for our heading 2, right? So we would need to reset this. So let's just, for the sake of keeping things consistent, we'll put a similar padding bottom, 22 pixels. We're enforcing that now on this H2. And when I do that, okay, it cinches up, and now my text is sitting back on my baseline grid. Okay? That's the trick with them units. They are always calculated based on whatever the font size is of something. So usually when you're going to run into problems and have your life ruined for a minute, it's because you've changed your font size somewhere, and these other calculations need to be made to fix it. Okay? Now, I think that that setting is probably way too big for a heading 2. Judging by the fact that at mobile scale, I've got 4 lines of colossal headline here, that's probably a little bit too much. Okay? Now, this is where editing and design kind of collide. Well, maybe the problem isn't how big the heading is set at. Maybe the problem is that we've got these huge, long, mouthful of words headings. But for right now, let's try something else. But let's not just throw this work away. Maybe we have a very traditional page where we say, you know what, H2, that's way too big, but for H1, that would be perfect. So I just changed my selector here from H2 to H1. Boom. Okay? We can forgive that a little bit more because it's longer. Okay? I wish I had a crummier written tab. What do you think of this in? What's that? It looks like enough space. Okay. I worry about that CSS. Right? This is part of the problem of the responsive web, is we never quite know what a page is going to do. All right? And generally, we like lines to break on meaningful phrases. We can't always control this, right? The first line, we're golden. Setting type, right? That's a complete thought. Building grids in. Yeah, it's kind of not a full thought, is it? So what we can do, everybody get ready, because this is a very exciting moment. Some of you who got in trouble for this in the first one. We can put on this heading between in and CSS a non-breaking space. Okay? You will see idiots. Nobody in here, thankfully. You will see poorly crafted websites where people stack up these non-breaking spaces all over the place to try to move things around or create a layout. This is the one true and holy reason to use a non-breaking space. Because what this is going to do now is treat forever this in CSS fragment as a single unit, so that CSS does not wind up on a line by itself. So if I go back here, and reload this page, not changing anything, just reloading. Now we have in CSS being a single unit by itself. This is really important, right? Welcome to the home page of Carl Stolly, right? Yeah, I don't want to do that. Keep my name together, right? So I put a non-breaking space between my first and last name, and then of course think about like how much welcoming and feel-freeing we have to do in our copy to tell people to click around, right? So, and of course, once we've got enough space, which is the very next size up from here, now we've got our complete thought on one page. What do we think? Does this, and of course here we're at setting type building, right? So it's not perfect, but I'm less worried about building by itself because grids in CSS is at least a complete thought. Okay. Now, does this violate my long-standing sermon about mixing presentation and content in HTML? I don't have a good answer for it. I'm curious what you think. You're going to say, yes, it does violate it. Okay, and what would your reasoning be for the violation that's occurring here?
Because it is styling.
Because it is styling. It certainly is a visual effect, right? It's going to hold those two things together. No, there's not, right? In and CSS now have this sort of link. However, the counterpoint one could argue, and again, these are the decisions you have to make yourself, is that structurally we are saying that this text is one unit. Right? This is, from a certain perspective, a structural choice that we're making. We want to keep this text together. The only other way that I can imagine that we could achieve this without using this little thing would be to do some kind of abomination like this, where we say, okay, we'll just use a bold tag here, and we'll say, like, display block to keep that together. But then I think we're even running more afoul, because now we're actually introducing HTML instead of just an entity to try to keep these two things together. So it's an unfortunate situation. It's one of those things that, especially if it's something like a heading that's for the entire site, right? If that's how we're using heading 1, I'm willing to make this particular sacrifice. Okay. But do this as you're writing and designing, and sort of tease out these different things and what the implications are of your choices. Because this can never be styled away. There will always be a non-breaking space there, which means that you'll never be able to get CSS on its own line. All right, so that's the trade-off. Okay, so let's go back one more time and let's set this heading to so we can go heading 2 and we can make this thing slightly smaller. Right? We can go 31 or 23. Let's go with 31. I don't know how good the wisdom is going to be. Font size, pixels. Line height, we know from last time that we need to at least bump it up to 44, right? And our padding bottom, we want to set that again back to 1 line. So we're going to have to change all of this stuff back to M units, but let's get it looking the way that we want it to before we spend a lot of time on math. So if I go back here, what do we think? Is it sitting on the baseline grid? Yeah. Let's pull out the grid lines here for a second, though, and just look at it for what it is, because ultimately we're not going to have a website for somebody. Ooh, and here's the greatest trick that you'll learn today. We could comment out this whole line, or we could just put a hash here in front of the base, hold it. Right? So now that's just treated like a URL fragment, so we're not going to get any weird errors. And again, the aspect ratio is screwed up here, so this actually doesn't look as offensive to you probably as it does to me on a corrected ratio up here. This is a nice, tight, compact block of text. This is kind of like stretching out a little bit to my taste, right? Almost like these are two separate things. So what can we do if you're like me and that's unacceptable? What might we do for our line height? Right, we went all the way up to 44. What could we put here? Come on, hockey fans. Blackhawks. What's Pat Foley always say? Big save when the game is almost over. Tree, turdy, tree, and a turd. Right? 33. Okay? So when 3 minutes and 33 seconds are left in the third period, Pat Foley often says, tree, turdy, tree, and a turd. Season opener, Thursday night. We should have a watch party at my house, but let's not. Somebody's still going to show up, and it'll be awkward and creepy. All right, here we go. 33. And what I like about this 33, just mathematically, in terms of keeping some regularity to this page, is that we've got a little less than 2 pixels separating our font size on the heading 1 and our line height on the heading 1. And here we've also got even a little bit fewer than 2 pixels. It's almost 1 pixel, right? That 3.1984. But they're a little bit closer. So let's jump back over to the page, reload it. Those to me look like headings that have been set in the same typographic universe. There's relatively the same amount of closeness between them. Okay? And that's a good start. Now let's bring our grid lines back and make sure that everything is still correct here. Get rid of our little hash there. Reload this page. Boom. Okay. Now we go off the grid line here because, again, we're doing 33 pixels of line height here. So we would expect these things to be slightly off. The measure is, do we ever again, for the length of this page, return to our grid lines? And yes, we can see in this paragraph that comes immediately after, we're back on it. Okay. Now notice, I did not put any bold on these headings. Okay. Too many people associate like heading and bold. Right? Like, oh, we've got to make it. No. And especially, and again, this you saw how eager I am to talk about typography with my massive lecture on Basecamp about font selection, right? When we get into typefaces, there's actually 3 kinds of typefaces in the world. Hang on to this for those of you who come back for 362 next semester. If we're talking about typefaces that are actually really well designed, right, which means probably not most of our system fonts. Text is drawn and set for typefaces are drawn and sized for text sizes, so that's our running copy. We get caption sizes, which is text that has been redrawn for smaller settings. Okay, it's not just a matter of changing the font size. We actually use a completely different portion of the font to set these sizes. And then really good fonts also have a display font, which is a drawing of the font that usually has a lot more detail to it. So you get a lot more delicate lines and strokes. that are meant to be shown at big sizes, right? Where we can, look at the little hook on that G or whatever it is that the thing has, okay? So it's not to say that you can't use boldface type, but let's talk about whether do we gain anything here if we should add, let's just double up the selectors here, heading 1, heading 2, font weight, bold. Do we add anything? Does that help? Does that make the page more readable? Does it make it more attractive? Everybody's shaking their head because that's what they want me to say, but I'm actually genuinely interested. It's entirely possible you could say, I like this way better. Okay? I don't like it because I don't like the way that Times New Roman gets bolded. Not for the particular look that I have in mind for this page anyway. Right? So I'm going to leave bold out of it. Now, if we wanted to, we could also do this. Okay? This is a very common typeface pairing, right? Which is like a cheese and wine pairing, except with typefaces. Okay? It's a little less fun. But you'll see this pattern often where people will set their headings in a sans serif face, and they'll set their body copy in a serif face. You can find examples of this all over the place. Okay? All right. So let's finish up quickly and do some math. So we've got a new font size of 42.635 pixels. How do we calculate this in ems? What do we have to do?
Divided by 18.
Why 18?
Because that's what we decided.
Yes, that's our context, right? We have to go back and say, hey, HTML is where we set 18, so we're always talking about an 18 pixel M here. All right? And so very quickly we do 42.635 divided by 18 is 23.6. Let's go with 69 M's. Damn it. 2.369. In the right place, please. 2.369. Okay? So we change this to 2.369 M's. And again, don't go crazy and start trying to recalculate everything. Do one at a time. Reload it. Of course, I've got the, that didn't really help. But we can still see that everything is lining up correctly on the grid. Okay, so we assume that that calculation is correct. We have a line height of 44 pixels. So now what is our calculation here? No. We have a new sizing context here. 42.635 pixels is our sizing context. So that's how we have to calculate M's here. We do 44 divided by, I can't remember anything today, 42.635 is 1.30 or 1.032 M's. Okay? Every time we change the font size, we change the context of what an M is. Okay? So we change this to 1.032 M's. We reload the page. Boom, perfect. Still sitting the way we want it. And then finally, we've got our 22 pixels of padding on the bottom. So we do 22 divided by what? 42.635, right? We're still talking about that as being our M unit here. And here we're talking about 0.516 M's, which makes sense because that's close to our M value that's a full line. Okay, and again, we reload it. Perfect, nothing has moved. So now we can do this one more time, except it's a different set of figures. We have to do 31.984 divided by 18. just do 1.777 here. Why does my cursor keep wandering around? Okay, then we've got 33 divided by what? 31.984, right? Again, every time we set a font size, we're talking about a new context for our M. Okay, 1.032. We'll just round these up to 3 characters. All right, and then finally we have our 22 pixels divided by 688. Oops. Wait a second. No. Yeah, 31.984. 0.688. All right. We reload this one more time. Now, let's see. Zoom text only. The reason that we want to do all of our text-related sizes. Abigail, we kind of got this with your question this weekend about ems versus percent. Okay, you will see people that get confused, which Abby is not amongst them. But they'll go ahead and they'll continue to set their padding in pixels. Okay, which you can do, provided that everything in a browser, in any given browser, is exactly what you expect, which is to say a baseline 16-pixel M. If we do this, though, and we've got a browser where we only resize the text, which is basically what people are doing when they change their default M size, we'll see we slowly start to fall off the grid line here because it's still trying to maintain that 22 pixels of space. Okay? Whereas if we have our padding bottom set as an M unit, it's always going to be deriving the amount of space below us based on our text size. Okay, so that's why we do M units on anything that's derived from the size of the text. All right. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's get to the part that everybody actually showed up for today. And actually, let's do a commit first. Let's see, I think index, what happened there? Oh, okay. Let's do that first. I don't think, okay. Oh, maybe I do. Add non-breaking space in. Okay, good. I did put my shortcuts in here at least. Boom, and now we can go to get diff on our style sheet. And again, this is a nice, pretty commit waiting to happen. Everything we've done here has just been about the headings. All of them are organized nicely in our style sheet together, right? So this is really fast work. Except I want to grab this URL from modularscale.com and add it as a comment at the top of my style sheet. Okay. I'm going to put this here. Setting type with a 4:3 modular scale. Right? So some of you have been mystified about commenting on your CSS. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. Right? We just put that URL there, and every time we need to go and see what the type size is going to be or how it's going to change or how we want it to look, there's our reference for it. Okay? And beyond putting in that URL, because in case that site evaporates between now and 5 years from now when you come back to work on a project, we know what the ratio was so we can recreate that ourselves if we need to do a manual, take the font size, multiply it by 1.333, multiply it again, we can do that. Okay. So now let's make a commit. Let's do a quick git diff to make sure we've got everything we expect. and nothing that we don't. Good. Set headings to a 4:3 modular scale. Boom. All right. And I'll push that right up. Ka-chow. Okay, so this is where we start, right? The boring Stolly method of web design. Tiny little window, basic little font sizey kinds of things. But of course, this doesn't last forever. As we start to pull this thing out, eventually, this page starts to suck. Why does it suck? Yeah, do you want to read this? I mean, that is a great litmus test. I know I try to do as much by mathematics and reason and rationality, but at a certain point, you have to look at your emotional response to these designs. Do you want to read that? No. Nobody does. And the problem is if this is the copy for your website, if this is the copy for your resume, nobody's actually going to read it, right? We want to try to find copy and ways of sizing and presenting copy that is inviting, that makes people want to read what it is that you're saying. Okay? So this is a case where we want to start thinking about our use of media queries, right? Because for ages and ages and ages, people who were advocates of accessible design were like, oh, you should never use pixel units or anything like that. You should always do percentages or just let things be how big they are. And the problem is this is what happens. Okay? It gets too big. So we need a media query to help us with this. So how do we decide where our media queries are? Let's talk about the wrong way to do it first. Okay, what's the wrong way to figure out what your media queries ought to be? People will do this. iPhone, iPad resolutions. And then they'll find a table. Ooh, this is perfect, right? How tempting is this? iOSres.com. And you will have people be like, well, we need a 640 pixel media query because that's the iPhone SE. Also iPhone 5, iPhone 8, 750. We need one for that. And here's the iPhone 8 Plus, which is 1242, which is really huge. Okay, then we start getting into logical resolution 414. They will take a table like this, and then they'll add their Android phones into there, and they'll try to write all their media queries based on these devices.
God.
Why do you say God?
Just like, I mean, for the iPhones, it's kind of okay, but you don't really have that many iPhones, but for the Android phones, you have so many different ones.
Yes, right? And we can find, I'll bring one in next week. I don't want to try to find it now because I'm already burning out of time. But you can find sites that will visualize all the different size screens that their pages get viewed at. And what you end up having is a whole bunch of different things, right? Everything from the person who pulled your site up on their huge widescreen 5K monitor to somebody who pulled your site up on their tiny little phone, and you get all these different sizes and things like that, so you get this sort of like shape. So this is a completely unpredictable thing. Anyone who ever sets a media query to a particular device is basically saying how short-sighted they are, right? Because all it takes is Apple to do, as they did, last week or the week before, to introduce the new iPhone whatever with a new resolution, and then suddenly your site doesn't look quite as good as it should. So if we can't do that, if we can't take a master list of devices like this, how do we determine where our media queries are going to be? Which, by the way, I'm saying this term, and people are stroking their chins and like, ah, yes, media query. Does anybody know what the hell a media query is? Okay, let's look at one. Let's look at one. Let's just have it do something silly. So we do a media query down in the state styles portion of our site. Okay, that actually gives me a really interesting clue, because you shouldn't see that. So our states of the browser and user access. Always too excited. Okay, driven by media queries in this particular section of the style sheet. So we begin by writing @media. Okay, which is very exciting. Try to contain yourselves, I know, right? And then we specify, so @media is a particular keyword, and then we say we're going to query the screen media. So we're saying if we're talking about screen-based media here, and here I'm going to just pull one out of my head, and its minimum width, at the very least, this screen is 600 pixels wide. Then what I want you to do, and here's where it gets interesting looking, right? Because there's our closing curly brace for our media query, and here we're saying find the HTML tag, and then let's put border top 44 pixels solid red. Okay? This makes no sense. I don't know why you would do this, but what I want to show you is what a media query is and how it works. So if I go back over to my page that has been displayed in responsive design mode, I've got a little readout here. I know it's microscopic, but you can see right now we're sitting at 497 pixels, right? I set a media query at 600 pixels, and so what I'm saying is when we hit 600 pixels, the styles that we apply are going to change. Here we go, 550, 60, 70, 80, 90, like that, okay? Right? Now, this is not a very exciting use of media queries, but what it does is allow us to say when the screen reaches a certain point, we want to do something different to our styles. Okay? Now, this is the only way that we're going to query media in here, is with a minimum width. You will find tutorials, you will find books, you will find all kinds of guidance that tells you to set a max width, or worse, to combine a min width with a max width. What that ends up giving you, if you're doing what I'm telling you to do, which is to do a mobile-first style sheet, right? Notice, everything so far, all the stuff that we've set up, our font sizing, our typography, our baseline styles, right? All of these things are outside of any media query, meaning that we're designing for the mobile space first. Okay? Yes, sir?
When the device orientation changes, I'm assuming the width and the height switch over.
They do. You don't have to worry about that. Any browser from a good home is going to recognize, yes, it will recognize the orientation change, but the thing that matters most is how wide is the screen now. So it will recalculate that and re-render any styles. It's amazing how much stuff you just get for free when you do nice standards compliant CSS like this. Okay? So all of our baseline styles, we just keep these out. So if we used max width styles, we would end up having to repeat all of that stuff. You'll see that. People will tuck all of these baseline styles and they'll pick something, again, random. They'll be like, oh, how big is the iPhone? It's 640. So they'll say max width 640. And then you get beyond that. Let me show you. Because somebody's going to end up doing this and they're not going to understand what happens. So this is the wrong way to do it. Never, ever do this. Max width. Hang on, I got ahead of myself. Right? So we say media and max width, right? These are our mobiles. There is no mobile device bigger than 600 pixels, right? Everybody knows that. No, they don't. Okay? So if we tack all this stuff inside of there, and we reload our page, everything looks great, right? And then we start going up until we hit 600. And now we're back to this, right? That is exactly the appropriate reaction. You should sit back and draw in your breath because now all your hard work is lost. Okay? Now, for people who like wet style sheets, right? We enjoy typing. They'll copy and paste those styles in, set up another max width media query, and they end up just basically rewriting the style sheet for every size. We do not want to do this. We do not want to do max width queries. We keep all of our mobile first styles outside of any media query. Right? Let's go and find that little straggler right here. Zap. Okay? So we start with our mobile first styles. We want to just keep setting this stuff the way that it is. Right? When we say this is how big a heading should be relative to the body, believe us, right? And then as we have things that we need to change or adjust, we'll jump in and we'll use a min width media query like that. Okay, so let's do something that's actually helpful in this situation. So I call this playing the accordion, right? Where we start to just draw this in and out. And it becomes a matter of figuring out where, at what point do these lines get too long to read? Okay? How big is our space around the page right now? Anybody remember? I think we set it to one lead. which is 22 pixels, right? So beyond a very certain narrow range, I'm going to say like here, 370, 380, somewhere in here, I want to go from an M-based unit, which I'm using basically to protect the smallest screens, to a percentage-based unit. I want a certain percentage of the screen represented in these edges. Okay, so I'm going to do it, 375, right? It's as good of a place as anyway, so I'm going to say, let's find out. So we're saying min width 375. Let's refresh ourselves. Right, where did we set that? We had it on body. Padding right, padding left. So I'm going to actually just scoop these two styles up and reopen the body tag down here in my media query. I'm going to say padding left, padding right. Now, that's the pixel equivalent of 22 pixels. If I want to, at this point, I can do this same calculation to figure out what this is in percentages. I can take 22 pixels divided by the size of my viewport, 375, right? And that will give me a percentage value. So if I say 22 divided by 375, it's going to be minuscule. We're talking about 5.8%, right? 5.86 it has to be something ugly, of course. Oop, let's grab this, right? Because we're going to multiply it by 100. And actually, in this case, I'm going to let my decimals run out like this. Not 58, 5.8. Right, especially if we do this on both sides. Ooh, and of course, we need our percentage unit here. All right, and let's correct this. 375, like that. 375, like that. Okay. So now when I reload the page at this point, there actually should not be any change. Because right now I'm saying it's a 22 pixel gutter, or sorry, margin in M's. Now it's in percentages. But as I start to scale this thing out, you're going to see that the text slowly starts to drift away from the left edge here. Okay? In a way that I think probably isn't good enough. And here we have to think about the ways that people hold their phones. Abigail, have you have you ridden CTA yet to stare at people touching their devices? Have you read I tell everybody, go out and ride CTA and watch how people hold their phones, how they use their little paws to move things around, right? Or just, if you don't want to be that creepy, just watch your friends, right? Everybody's got that friend who types like text messages like this, because they've still got their keystroke sound on too, which is freaking annoying. Right? Do you not have this friend? Or elderly relative, or somebody who's like, peck, 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 one finger like this. Okay? How do you scroll on a phone? And sometimes it's good to do this, turn the screen off and just let your imagination run. This is where I scroll, right? My little thumb right here on the side of the phone, right? Some people reach over and they'll scroll down the middle, okay? How many of you are left-hand edge scrollers like this? How many of you can't, you just scroll? Like, I'm telling you, unlike most professors are like, no devices in my class. I'm like, get your devices out. How come you don't have your phone out? You've got to be prepared for class, right? Hold your phone and actually go with your muscle memory, okay? Most people, if you just ask them point blank, they can't remember, right? It's like I ask you, do you leave your house or your room or whatever pushing your left foot or your right foot out the door first? I know, right? Like, empirically, one has to go out first. Do you have a particular pattern? I don't know. Now you're going to go home and it's going to ruin your life. You're going to be, I think I'm right. I don't know, that doesn't feel right. Does it left, right? So are we all roughly left-hand edge scrollers? Anybody goes towards the middle? You swap between? Okay, depending on the hand. So yeah, I would be more like you. Like if I'm scrolling like this, I'm right-handed, so I've got less motor control in this thumb. So I'm going to probably swipe to the middle of the screen. This is incredibly uncomfortable for me to do. Usually because I don't scrunch up my thumb that small to do anything.
Unless you're a weirdo that does this.
So like playing the violin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I zoom in, I go over and I do this.
Okay, so you do that. All right. How about with tablets? Where are you at when you scroll on here? And again, it depends, right? If I'm doing something very deliberate, like I'm trying to look up flight times or something like that for my mom or something, right? You'll do the newscaster thing, right? The newscasters that have the double looped thing for their iPads so they don't drop it.
I will say that on my laptop, which has a touchscreen, I tend to use my left hand.
Ooh, that's an even more. Okay, so people who have touchscreen laptops tend to be very much this zone, right?
And I tend to use like my left hand for swiping back and forth between
Okay,
pages.
right? When I'm sitting on my couch at home and I'm barely sitting upright and the dog is in my lap, right? Like I've got one thumb. This is my preferred scrolling area choice here, right? We want to talk always about one thumb, one eyeball. Okay, that's the most we can assume that anybody's going to give what we design. One thumb and one eyeball, meaning not they're going to like pluck out their other one and be like, don't need this. What a beautiful design. I don't even want to look half of it, right? One thumb and one eyeball, meaning that they're probably doing something else or they have some other goal in mind when they're on our site, right? Nobody sits down and pulls up a chair underneath their desk and is like, well, I'm going to go look at Stolly's website now. It's so beautiful. No, it's like, shit, when was that due? Right? And you're figuring it out on the way to class, like, oh man, should I go? Am I going to get in trouble? Is he going to know? He'll probably know, right? So one thumb, one eyeball, right? The desktop thing is even more interesting with the wide screen like that and where people's thumbs need to go, right? After a long day of using your phone with your sweaty, greasy, been eating chips all day hands, right? Take this thing out and just examine sort of like where are the hot spot areas on your device where you touch it a lot, right? And then get yourself, if you're a perfectionist neat freak like me, a nice microfiber cloth so you can then clean this thing off, right? So you don't gross people out. I swear to God, you see some people's phones, they sit down next to you like, oh, let's make a plan. Like, oh, okay, I'll look up a restaurant. And you pull out this phone, it's like, I've lost my appetite. That's the most disgusting looking thing. I could see your ear print on it. Right? Microfiber cloth. I'm going to need a little bit of water because I'm spitting all over this. Seriously, every night I come home from teaching with this thing, like it's water and rub it down, get it non-gross, right? Okay, so, which is all to say that as we start to build up towards larger screens, we want to think about having bigger, more comfortable margins here, okay? To accommodate scrolling, but also to buy us some time in terms of how big do we want to have our text be. So, all right, so at 600, I've suddenly made the switch to this, but I think I want to actually be a little bit more dramatic than go from, or what was it, 375? Let's do like a full, let's do 44 pixels. Let's double the size once we get to this point. All right, let's do 44 divided by 375. Now we were talking about 11.7 repeating 3. There we go. Always good to update your math. Right, now we're doubling this, which means we're going to have an interesting little effect here, right? If I shrink my screen back up below where that media query fires, right? And now as I get up towards 375, there we go. Now we've suddenly got a lot more space, okay? Which means that we buy ourselves a lot more room. Like I'm not thinking like, wow, there really needs to be a second column of text here. No, we've got a nice, comfortable column of text here. Okay? Now it just starts to fall apart. Even that's not so bad. At least the first paragraph. That's where it's starting to fall apart. 640, right in there. Okay? And what I might do at this point is say, you know what, for how far this is from people's faces, right? As screens get physically larger, they tend to get physically further away from their faces. I might say, you know what I'd really like to do at this point is kind of bump all the text up just a little bit. Now, here's the awesome thing. If I want to resize the text on my screen, what was my 640 is where I was at. So I can say, and let me just copy this whole line so I don't have to type the whole thing out. Min width 640 pixels. I'm going to say HTML. Set your font size to 20 pixels. And specifically, I want you to do that in ems. So I need to recalculate this again. 20 divided by 16. 20 divided by 16. That's 1.25. Okay. Oops. Let's put a unit on there. Okay. Now, our grid is going to be all screwed up because everything is based on the M unit. But now, I've resized all the type on my page. Let's get rid of the grid because it's no longer true. Oop. There we go. Bumped it up just a little bit, right? This is a minor little adjustment. But now I've made this more comfortable for larger screens, right? And because every single thing in my typographic setting is set around the text size, all I have to do is adjust that base font size on HTML and my whole design carries forward with me. I've still got a very nice grid here. Everything is still lined up exactly how I want it to be, right? All right, we've got 5 minutes. So let's say we get really big and fancy here. Okay, we decide, you know what? We might need an intermediate style here someplace, but right around 900 pixels, I've got this little aside down here that I really want to have as a second column. Okay? So now what I'll do is I'll figure out, let's do it right at 900 pixels actually. I'm going to need some intermediate styles here, but for right now we'll say at 900 pixels we're going to make this thing a 2-column design. So I've got 900 pixels that I want to slice up into a multi-column grid. Okay? And I'm going to do a 3-column grid. 2, 3, like this. Okay? We'll talk about this more when we actually do CSS grids. But our basic vocab is that this area outside of our grid, this is what is known as margin. Okay? This is not the same as the CSS margin property. When we're talking about grid design, the outside of the grid is known as margin. On the inside of the grid, we have these other little lines that keep our individual columns from touching. These are called gutters. Right? So when somebody tells you to get your mind out of the gutter, you'd be like, I wasn't even thinking about grids. Okay? And it's true, you probably weren't. These are the columns. Okay? But what we do is we create modules out of our columns, right? We have a 3-column grid that I'm envisioning, but what we're going to do is we're going to say this becomes a module. So our primary content, I want more colors. Okay, so our primary column sits in this grid over here, and our secondary column, I don't know why I didn't bother to grab the red one while I was over here, but it's okay, I can use the exercise. All right, and our secondary area is going to sit over here, like that. Okay? Possibly. I mean, I don't think I'm going to have to write code in 3 minutes, so let's just talk 3 minutes more of grid theory. Right? We can set up all kinds of different multi-column grids. Okay? We could do, for example, a 4-column grid. 3, 4, like that. Now, the trouble with 4-column grids or 6-column grids or 8-column grids, if you don't use them carefully, is that people will say, oh, well, we'll just do one module over here for this content, and we'll do another module over here for this content. Which, unless you're doing facing pages on a book, this is a really bad idea. Why is this a bad idea? To have 2 perfectly equally sized columns. Which one of these is more important? Right? The left one. More space is more important. Right? Here, if we have both of these things sized exactly the same way, we're not giving anybody's eyeball a cue as to, like, this is where you should probably be looking on this page. Okay? So I'm always a big fan of, like, the 3-column grid, the 5-column grid, right? Especially for beginners, because it forces you to make a decision, right? You know, you can do this. We could say, okay, we're going to have the big module over here, but then we're going to have a smaller module over here. You're still saying this is the more important one. Okay? Western audiences who read left to right tend to favor the left corner of a page, but you can still override that with your type sizing, with color, with all of this, but it starts with how we're using the grid. Okay? Eric. Pros and cons? I would probably, that's a really good question. What we can do in that case is we might say, hey, we're going to make a microgrid within this thing. Right? So this is still our main content area. So here's our pro side, here's our con side. Or when we don't have enough space, right, as is the case in mobile, then we've just got modules that we stack up like this. Pros come first, cons come second. But yeah, that is an edge case where you might say, well, we don't want to say, but you probably wouldn't do that anyway, right? You wouldn't create a page that says pro and con unless you're selling like some kind of miracle dietary supplement or something like that to be, look how sad these other products are, right? Okay? So that's where we'll pick up on Wednesday, is doing the math behind this and then the different positioning models for CSS. Yes, Rob? Is the what? Ooh, yeah. Good point. It might. Yep. And ultimately, I'll resize those queries as M units anyway, so that as somebody scales up their text, we fire the breakpoints based on that. 16. Regardless of what you do on your page, the browser understands those breakpoints as M